Have you ever actually stopped to wonder what's really in the clothes you're wearing every day? Well, today we're going to pull back the curtain on the hidden world of chemical safety, specifically in the fashion industry. We're going to explore a really fundamental idea that decides not just what's on the hanger, but what's actually safe for you and for the planet.
It seems like such a simple question, right? But the answer is, well, it's incredibly complex. The journey from a raw fiber to the t-shirt on your back involves a whole cocktail of chemicals, and figuring out how to manage all of that is a massive challenge for any apparel company.
So here's our game plan for this explainer. First, we'll look at what kind of chemicals we're even talking about. Then we'll introduce the sustainability rulebook that a lot of companies use to navigate this stuff. After that, we'll get to the absolute core of it all, the difference between hazard and risk. We'll finish up by looking at the tools of the trade, and most importantly, why any of this really matters. Sound good? Let's dive in.
Okay, so here's the deal. The finished clothes, shoes, and accessories you buy can, and sometimes do, contain tiny traces of chemicals that are either straight up banned or heavily regulated. And we're not talking about obscure things here. Some of these can have pretty serious consequences.
And look, that's not me being dramatic. This quote comes directly from the SASB standard for the apparel industry, which is really the blueprint for this entire explainer. It makes it crystal clear that depending on the chemical and our level of exposure, the stakes are incredibly high, both for our own health and for the environment.
So how in the world do these massive global brands even begin to navigate this chemical minefield? Well, many of them turn to a guide called the SASB standards. You can think of it as a super detailed rulebook for reporting on sustainability.
SASB, that sounds for the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, creates these really specific standards for all kinds of different industries. The whole point is to help companies identify and report on sustainability risks, the kind of stuff that could actually impact their bottom line. It's all about making these complex environmental and social issues way more clear and understandable for everyone, from investors to us.
And these standards are incredibly thorough. I mean, they start by describing the entire industry, then they pinpoint the key issues to focus on, like chemical management. From there, they give companies specific metrics to measure their performance and even detailed instructions on how to do it all. It's the whole shebang, designed for total clarity and consistency.
All right, now we're getting to the real heart of the matter. When a company decides how it's going to manage chemicals, it usually follows one of two big philosophies, a hazard-based approach or a risk-based approach. They sound kind of similar, I know, but trust me, they are fundamentally different ways of seeing the world. So, first up is the hazard-based approach. This way of thinking is all about the built-in properties of a chemical. It asks one very simple question. Is this substance, by its very nature, potentially harmful? If the answer is yes, then you manage it based on that inherent danger, no matter how it's being used. The risk-based approach, on the other hand, adds a really crucial second step. It starts with that same hazard information, but then it asks, what's the actual chance of harm happening given how we're exposed to it in the real world? It's not just about whether a substance can be dangerous, but whether it is dangerous in the tiny amounts you'd find in a finished product. Okay, let's put these side by side because this is where it really clicks. The hazard approach on the left basically says, this chemical is toxic, so we restrict it, full stop. The risk approach on the right says, okay, yeah, this chemical is toxic, but the level of exposure in this jacket is so incredibly low that the actual risk of you getting hurt is practically zero. A company might choose the hazard approach because it's super cautious and builds trust. Another might go for the risk-based approach because it opens up more options for materials and innovation, as long as they can prove the exposure is safe. So that's the theory, but how do companies actually put these ideas into practice? They have a specific set of tools they use to turn a policy on a piece of paper into action across their huge global supply chains. The most important tool is something called a Restricted Substance List, or RSL. Just think of it as the ultimate do-not-use list for a company's manufacturers. It tells suppliers exactly which chemicals are banned or limited, the maximum safe amount allowed in a product, and even the exact lab tests they have to use to prove it. Now, here's a really interesting part. How do global brands handle this? Instead of having different lists for different countries, which would be a nightmare, many of them just adopt a single RSL based on the strictest rules from anywhere in the world. It's a pretty smart strategy. If you comply with the toughest regulations out there, you're covered everywhere. But beyond just banning the bad stuff, the most forward-thinking companies are using what's called green chemistry. This is a totally proactive approach. It's asking, hey, can we just design a molecule or a process that does the job without being hazardous in the first place? It's all about building safety into a product's DNA, literally designing the problem out of existence from the very start. So how can we, you and I, know if a product is actually safe? That's where third-party certifications come into play. You've probably seen logos like OECOTEX or Blue Sign on clothing tags. These are basically stamps of approval. They do all the homework for us and act as an independent check to verify that a product has been tested and meets certain safety standards.
Okay, so we've talked about corporate strategy and technical stuff, but let's bring this all back home. Why does this difference between a hazard and a risk philosophy actually matter to you?
And you know, this isn't just a fashion thing. Not even close. The apparel industry is just one of 77 different industries that SASB has created standards for. That just shows you the sheer scale of this challenge. This exact same debate, hazard versus risk, is happening all across the global economy, from the clothes we wear to the phones in our pockets.
So here's the big takeaway. A company's choice between a hazard or a risk-based approach has a direct impact on the products you buy. It affects their legal exposure, their brand reputation, and most importantly, it has real-world consequences for our health and for the health of the planet. And that really leaves us with a final thought to chew on. We usually pick brands based on style or price or how well they're made. But underneath all of that, there's a deeper choice being made about their fundamental approach to safety. So the next time you're shopping, you might ask yourself, what philosophy am I really buying into? Thanks for joining us for this explainer.